Welcome to episode 73 of the Clayton Tyner podcast. If you are new to the podcast, my name is Clayton. I'm a pastor in San Antonio, and in this podcast, I take current events. We try to look at them through a biblical worldview. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe. If you find this content helpful, you can also go to patreon.com/Clayton Tyner, and you can get exclusive access to some videos, monthly live Q&A. If you're interested, you can also go to metachurch.tv, M-E-T-A church.tv. That's where I have the privilege of being the lead pastor. So much is happening in the world right now. It's crazy. We're going to look at the beginning of kind of Trump, the outgoing of Biden. Everyone gets a pardon. I'm personally just very offended. I didn't get my own pardon for just any and all things I may ever have done or ever will do. So I'm still waiting on my pardon in the mail. We're going to look at the beginning of the deportations. How should we think about that? If we are followers of Jesus, how do we feel about this? How do we balance like needing to uphold the laws? What does justice look like? What does compassion look like? We're going to look at Trump coming in with a strong first week, not messing around, standing down the Colombian president. What does that mean? What can we learn from it? And somehow I am in the tea on Ryan Reynolds, Blake Lively, Justin Baldoni. Don't know how it happened. Genuinely, I don't know how I got into this, but I'm into it. And we're going to see what we can learn from it on episode 73 of the Clayton Tyner podcast. On his way out, Biden issued so many pardons. You can look at like the list of how many people each president had pardoned. And in the modern era, I believe Obama was kind of towards the top, like 1,900 pardons or something like that. Biden blew that out of the water, something like over 8,000 pardons and commutations, and using his executive power to this end. Now, on his way out, he had some very interesting use of the pardon power. It started with his son, Hunter, where he just kind of gave a pardon, not based on a specific crime, but it's like, hey, you know, if it just so happens that anything happened between some random date, January 1st, 2014, when he started working overseas, where we were clearing a bunch of cash, all the way up to present day, you know what? Just kind of get out of jail free card for anything and everything. And everyone was kind of like, wow. And so, yeah, interesting. Then on his way out, it was the January 6th committee. It was Mark Milley. It was Anthony Fauci. Now, part of this is when no one has been like even accused of a crime, or at least not convicted of a crime, and you give them pardons, part of the issue is you're just almost making them guilty whether they're guilty or not. Like, it seems like an admission of guilt. And when Trump was outgoing from his first term, this is exactly what the Congress said. This is exactly what the media said, that if he gives any preemptive pardons, it is automatically an admission of guilt. And so are we going to use equal scales and measures here? Then, in the waning hours of his presidency, Biden also gave preemptive pardons to, you know, for all intents and purposes, every member of his family who could plausibly be held liable for anything over the last 10 or so years. And the rhetoric is, we were so afraid that Trump was going to come in and, you know, like use the Department of Justice to go after a former president, that we had to do this in order to just move on and heal. And so, you know what, fair enough. However, whatever high ground the left may have had was completely erased by these moves, and Trump came in, and Trump has also been leveraging the pardon power. Not only has he pardoned some specific individuals, he then pardoned, blanket pardon, across all of the people who are currently in prison or house arrest or anything for their role in the January 6th quote unquote insurrection, which was never prosecuted or found to be an insurrection, but obviously a very bad look for the country that day. Whatever all the details are and all the theories and all the conspiracies, everyone got a pardon. It seemed clear that there was prejudicial treatment for that that again wasn't held equally with the riots that burned down many major cities across the summer of 2020. And so the narrative, at least, is because of the unfair application of the law, everyone involved in J6 is getting a pardon. Also, there have been some pro-life activists who the government has been very heavy-handed with who also received pardons. So pardons for everyone. And I'm over here like, hey, where's mine? There was that time in 2009 where I got turned around in Austin and I went down the one-way street, but like the wrong way, down a one-way street. And I mean, for like a mile and a half. So I'm just going, hey, how do we think about this? Read an interesting article recently, kind of trying to think through this use of the presidential pardon power. It says, after former President Joe Biden issued a slew of last-minute pardons on Inauguration Day, his successor promptly took the oath of office and issued a series of pardons affecting thousands of people just hours later. It was a tale of two executives with shared power. Biden pardoned several members of his family, lawmakers and staff members who served on the January 6th Congressional Committee, and others such as retired General Mark Milley and Anthony Fauci. Trump, with a single stroke of the pen, pardoned nearly all of the January 6th rioters, which included more than 1,500 people, even those convicted of assaulting police officers. The presidential pardon power is briefly stated in the U.S. Constitution. Article 2, Section 2 says the president shall have power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. Dan Ehrman, director of the Law and Public Policy minor at Northeastern University, who teaches courses on the Supreme Court, says the pardon power is a remarkable tool of executive authority, one with very few limits on the way it can be used. The pardon power happens to be one of those presidential powers that is basically unreviewable, Ehrman says. It's inherently political, and there's so little that the other branches can do. Here's kind of the real danger in escalating these pardons and now creating new categories of pardons, preemptive pardon, which I think Gerald Ford is the only president to ever use when he kind of preemptively pardoned Nixon for anything he might have done during his time in office. Now we're using it for congressional committees who have some heat on them. We're using them for health advisors who, had a massive, massive role in like locking the entire country down and pushing some almost authoritarian measures towards vaccination and things like that. Now we're using preemptive pardons on our own family members just to kind of shield us from any liability in the future. What's interesting about Trump's pardons is most people do what Biden did. It's like in the very end of their presidency during the lame duck period, they don't have a second term, they've lost, and then it's like, get out of jail free cards, anyone who wants one. And Trump has kind of broke tradition by like day one starting to give out pardons, day 5 giving out some more pardons. He's not hiding it. This isn't like, well, I'm on my way out and, who cares what I do at this point. He's starting his presidency this way. And the danger that we're getting into with some of these pardons is twofold. Number one is we're kind of being forced by just the sheer volume of some of these pardons into running into our echo chambers and throwing away our critical thinking. So I think there are cases to be made. I've heard them made for why everyone on J6 had to be pardoned because, as mentioned, the law wasn't equally applied against similar instances in a similar time frame. So 2020, people get to loot and riot, and there's not a lot that comes down from the Department of Justice. January 2021, the other side of the aisle has their own riot. Everyone kind of gets, thrown away, locked up, throw away the key. However, for people who want justice, right? And that should be the goal. If we want justice, then sometimes the pardon power, it exists to ensure that if the legislators get heavy-handed, if a department like the Department of Justice gets heavy-handed, that the president can bring back a measure of justice. But then we've got people being pardoned who significantly attacked cops. So, out of the 1,500, maybe like 1,487 of them, it would be just like you've served your time. There was not an equal application of the law. But what about the people who really were heinous on J6, who really were bad actors? And so maybe it's like, look, we're moving fast. We're a new administration. We gotta, just run through things. So the first danger is, it's like if you're on the right politically, then you feel like you just have to co-sign all 1,500, and you don't. We have this idea, and both sides have it, where it's like, if I give an inch on anything, then we just lose the whole ball game. Hey, that's not true. And so people who are more on the left and, support certain ideologies, they have to go with even the most radical versions of those ideologies, because if they give an inch, you feel like you lose the whole game. People on the right, you have your ideologies, and you feel like even the craziest parts of it, you can't say, yeah, I'm actually a little bit uncomfortable. Like the pardons, I think in general, they're good. But the guy who tased a cop, I don't feel like it's wise that he just walks without really careful consideration. So that's the first danger, is these blanket broad pardons are just pushing people deeper and deeper into their echo chambers, which is for sure the last thing that we need, right? The last thing we need is just everyone more and more in their bubbles, where we just turn off our critical thinking and we're just assigned our sound bites, and then we just go with it from there. No nuance, no one in the middle. The second danger is obviously the danger of precedent. And so if one president on their way out pardons their entire family, the incentive structure then is for the next president on his way out to pardon his entire family. And one of the things that I genuinely appreciate about the model of governance that we have at the federal level is just the high level of checks and balances. And the framers, they did this on purpose because they just had enough examples throughout history of the different ways that governments can get out of weight with one part of the government kind of sabotaging the rest. And that can lead to authoritarianism, that can lead to fascism, that can lead to communism, that can lead to just oppression and all of the things they wanted to avoid in this new experiment. And so one of the things they did is it's all these different checks and balances. And that is, for all intents and purposes, part of what the pardon power is if, some part of the government, some branch or some department is heavy-handed, then, the president can just decide. Okay, last time. That was last time. So checks and balances are a very good thing. But what happens when this check that you've given the executive also begins to be misused or abused? And so, it's like executive powers. The idea is the legislators, they legislate. The Congress passes the laws, and then the executive executes the laws. But now increasingly, it's like every president signs more and more and more executive orders than the president before them. And so as soon as you start that precedent, people will follow it. And what are we seeing? It's like Obama said, all I need to run the country is a phone and a pen, right? Executive orders. And so Trump comes in, a lot of executive orders, and half of them are just to reverse the last guy's. Biden comes in, even more executive orders. Half of them are to reverse Trump's. Trump comes back in. He rescinds 78 of Biden's executive orders. So executive orders to then just have the next guy make even more executive orders to rescind the last executive orders. Well, this is going to be what happens with the pardons now. The pardons are going to become increasingly partisan. They're going to become increasingly self-protective. And as the precedent gets set, they're going to be used more and more broadly. And it points at an insidious fact of the country that we're living in, if you're watching this and you live in the United States. And that is the corruption within our justice system. It's so broad and it's so pervasive. And we just live knowing there is a two-tier justice system. And we've known that for a very long time. It's like no one famous ever gets truly in trouble for anything. We know that. And if you get in trouble for the same thing, you're going to jail. You're going to go to prison, dude, because you're not Charlie Sheen.
Wow.
So we've already known that. So you have it on two tiers, but it's also bifurcating left and right politically. So it's both two-tier and partisan. And that can't hold forever. And the president doesn't have the scope or the insight to just fix the justice system via pardons alone. And so I think we have to get back to an understanding of what justice is. And part of how you do that is you have to get unentrenched. You have to come out from your echo chambers, and you got to be able to say things to your representatives, to the people on your side of the aisle, like, hey, maybe I'm on the left, but just giving preemptive pardons to your whole family, this was really bad. And whoever's next up on the roster on the left, we expect you not to do that. If you're on the right, you may think it's totally fair and actually just to kind of rebalance the scales and give pardons to most of the people who are at the Capitol on J6. But the people who beat up cops, you got to be able to say, hey, let's not just let those people walk, right? Like we're on the right. We're the back the blue people. And so two problems. One is it further entrenches people. And two, it sets a precedent that could lead us into dangerous territory. And even though it's two different problems, they're fixed by fixing the first problem. And by us all having enough integrity and being willing to engage in critical thinking and being willing to speak out, even if it's against our quote unquote side of the aisle, to just do what is just, to do what is actually right, and to pursue those things. Because if we pursue justice and if we hold people accountable for their lack of justice, then we can maybe in our lifetimes see a quality of politician who isn't just playing partisan games and isn't just self-protecting, but is actually representing the people that they were elected to represent. So the deportations have started, and like the narrative has been, they're starting with people who aren't just, here in the United States illegally, or in the United States, undocumented, or however you want to say that. I know there's people seeking asylum. There's people who have just come over. There's bad actors, but people who are here and they're undocumented and they have committed crimes. And so that's kind of where things are starting. And, it's like, this is going to be the game for the next 4 years is people who are on the left on this issue. They're only going to post pictures of really heartbreaking situations, and people who are on the right in this situation, they're only going to post videos and pictures of like scary gang members and felons and, criminals and murderers and stuff like that being deported. But it has begun, and we're going to talk a little bit about how we think about that. If you are a follower of Jesus, how do we balance this? And part of the answer is it's like, if in your mind it's super, super simple, you may not be thinking critically about this, and you may not be thinking entirely biblically about this. Maybe you are, and you're way smarter than me, and so it's simple to you. Here's why I think it is a balance. You have, and I'm going to break this down broadly, but like on the left side of the political spectrum, what you typically have are people who are super high in trade openness. They're super high in compassion, and just like people who are here, and however they got here, they're here, and taking them out of the country and back to the country that they fled, it just feels like it lacks compassion. And so the issue in only honing in on compassion is sometimes helping can actually hurt. And one of the issues that I have with a lot of the left's ideology is it is focused in a univariable way. So I'm only seeing like one issue, and I can't see beyond that one issue. And they think of fixing problems in the narrowest possible scope. And there are always trade-offs, right? So there's a give and take to all decision making. You learn this as soon as you start leading at any level. There's always a give and take. And so I might do something that feels compassionate or appears compassionate or makes someone feel good in the moment, but its broader implications actually hurt people on a much broader scale. And so there is compassion, and on the right is typically focused on boundaries. I mean, quite literally in this conversation, because we're talking about people who have crossed the border. They have crossed a boundary, and they are not allowed to do that, right? It is breaking the laws of the land. And they have a point there, because it's like, if you don't have a border, you don't have a country, right? And you have laws in that land, and the way you know that the laws are in that land is because you know what the land is, because it has a border, right? And so borders matter and boundaries matter, and you actually can't thrive in life if you don't have boundaries. You have to have boundaries, psychologically and emotionally and relationally and in your career and in your friendships. And like everything requires boundaries. Your home is a boundary. Your property is a boundary. Your car is a boundary. Your morals and ethics, those are boundaries, right? So these things feel like they are in competition, and like you can't have one without the other. And so if you're going to uphold these boundaries, then by de facto, you're not going to be compassionate. And if you're just going to be compassionate, then you're not going to be able to uphold your boundaries. And so we pit these against each other. And these are the conversations from the left to the right is, you guys on the right, you're heartless, you don't care, you're monsters. You say that, a lot like you're conservative Christians, but you don't care about the foreigner, you don't care. And then on the right, they look and it's like, the left says to the right, you don't have a heart. And the right says to the left, like, you don't have a brain, like you just want open borders and how is this going to work? And the right can also get hyper fixated on just how this affects the individual, but disagree with me in the comments. The right typically is thinking more in terms of systems and processes. And so while they also get stuck on kind of univariable solutions, it's often at a broader scope. And so it's like, yes, we let this one person stay who has committed some criminal acts and they're undocumented, they're in the country. We let them stay, and that feels compassionate towards that person. But what about the person that they robbed? And because the person got robbed, what about their kid who can no longer go to the school they were going to? And what about the school that has lost a student? What about the student who now has a different path in life? And you kind of like broaden the scope out to the harm principle, not just being focused on the individual, but more on a social and society-based level. So how do you manage this? And so there's a super viral video, and we're going to look at this not to just dunk on Selena Gomez. I actually find this video quite compelling. Maybe you don't. Maybe it's just, it's definitely like been a meme. But this is her reacting to some of the deportations.
I just want to say that I'm so sorry. All my people are getting attacked. The children. I don't understand. I'm so sorry. I wish I could do something, but I can't.
Okay, so this is like, the easiest video in the world to dunk on, right? Selena Gomez, she's out of touch. She's super rich. I'm older than Selena Gomez, and okay. It's hard for anyone like my age or older probably to imagine being this emotional, and the instinct to like put my phone on selfie mode. And, it's like she captioned it, "I'm sorry," in the Mexican flag. Like that, all of that's hard for me to understand, but I am a dad and I'm raising kids, and my poor kids, they don't get social media or anything until they're like older teenagers. And this is exactly why, because when they need to express emotions, like I don't want them to associate emotional regulation with making a video and posting it for millions of people. Regardless, this is how generations are thinking about it. This is where they process. This is their community. This is where they get intrapersonal connection, or at least a facade of intrapersonal connection. I don't think this is for attention. I obviously don't know Selena Gomez. I think this does represent some percentage of the country who is seriously bothered by this. Now, people on the right will be quick to point out, like, they're not rounding up children. They're specifically rounding up criminals right now. And so this is where, like, coming out of our entrenched ideologies, even if you're on the left, if someone's here and they're also actively breaking laws, then, you should not just be okay with that. That's kind of a common sense. It's like, someone has come into, somewhere they're not supposed to be, but they're behaving, you kind of let it go. But then if they start acting up, and especially really targeting people who are high level criminals, then it's like, yeah, you've kind of blown your opportunity here, and we're just gonna have to wait and see, because in the campaign, the promise was the largest deportation of undocumented immigrants in American history. And that would certainly include families, and it would certainly include children. So how do we think about this? This is the question. As Jesus followers, how do we think about this? Well, one of the things that we are supposed to pursue is justice. And justice is getting what you deserve and not getting what you do not deserve. And it's very clear, Paul talks to the Romans in Romans 13 and 14 about the role of the government and that the government wields the sword, right? And sometimes that's literal, like the government goes to war, to protect its people. It also is metaphorical in that, the metaphorical gun of government, like government has power and it's supposed to use that power to protect the people under its jurisdiction. Part of how it does that is by having secure borders. That's been true of all places in all times. That was true of ancient Israel in the Old Testament. It had borders and the borders mattered, and there was a process to integrate into society, and you were expected to follow that process. And the same is true here. It is not compassionate for people who are trying and are on these, long processes going through the correct procedures to try and get into America. And they keep getting pushed back further and further because of people who are jumping that line, coming over illegally. All those things are not compassionate, even though they seem compassionate to the individual once they are here. And so we should seek justice, and boundaries certainly matter. We are called to be people who live with boundaries, who uphold boundaries, who respect boundaries. We respect ourselves by having boundaries. We respect the boundaries of others. That's on a micro level, on a macro level, all the way out to our cities and our states, and even our country is delineated by boundaries and borders. And those are good things. And it's why the world functions well, right? At the same time, we are called to reach all people in all places. And so my warning to the right is, if you are a follower of Jesus, you can see people who are here and they are here illegally and they've come in through illegal means being taken back. You can see that as just, but a lot of what I'm seeing on the right is a celebratory nature surrounding the deportations. And if you're on the right and you're not a Jesus follower, dude, do your thing.
Wow.
But if you follow Jesus, then you are not an American first. It's not that you can't be proud to be an American. I am grateful to be an American, but I'm not an American first. And it's very, very clear in scripture that we're not ambassadors for the United States. We are ambassadors for Christ, crying out to the world, to everyone, be reconciled to God. That is our goal first and foremost. And so, there are Haitian immigrants here, undocumented, and they're being sent back to Haiti. I spent a lot of time in Haiti. I feel like I, through my work at Metachurch, have a calling to the people of Haiti. I have to be able to hold both things simultaneously. Okay, if I were in a third world, impoverished, impossible situation and thought I could get my family into America, I would want to do that. Totally. I didn't ask to be born where I am. They didn't ask to be born where they were. However, if you break laws, justice may be served. And so we can be okay with that, while at the same time holding compassion for them as individuals. Compassion is not usurping justice. It's never that. Sometimes, instead of pitting those things against each other, we can see them as two sides of a tension that is holding up the affairs of the world in a decent and orderly fashion. And so I've seen a lot of people on the right, big time commentators, who are definitely very happy and are wanting more and more and more deportation. And maybe that is birthed out of justice and boundaries, and that's good. At the same time, though, when they're showing videos and clips of people being pulled out of the country, it's kind of like this. Yeah, get the hell out of here. This is our country and we're going to send you back. If you also claim the name of Jesus, you got to be really careful here. Jesus came to set the captives free. Jesus didn't come to erase all boundaries. Jesus didn't come to get rid of all of the laws. Jesus upheld the laws. At the same time, the kingdom of God, the eternal kingdom where as Jesus followers, our home actually is, it is made up of one nation. This is what Peter says in 1 Peter. He says, you are now a holy priesthood. You are one nation. You are, he even says, one race. And he's talking about all of the people of God. He's talking about people from every country and creed. We are now all one. Paul says in Galatians, there is now no Jew or Greek, slave or free, male or female. Those distinctions are erased once we come into our new identity, which is in Christ. And so that has to be the preeminent goal. And we're in this unique position as Christians where we don't have to have compassion and boundaries pit against each other. We can hold both of them simultaneously, and we should. And so we have to be careful in our narratives and how we talk about that, how we go about that, because the danger is in our zeal. If you're on the right, in your zeal for justice finally kind of coming back into the equation, for boundaries being reinstated, in your overcorrection from feeling like, for the last 4 years, there's just been an erasure of boundaries and a lack of justice in this area. You can overcorrect into moving past compassion and into something that is also unjust, demonizing and dehumanizing the people that, whether you live recognizing it or not, if you follow Jesus, you have been called to reach. Jesus said, go into all the world and preach the gospel. Those are our marching orders. More than the Declaration of Independence, the Great Commission. It is the creative mandate reinstated for the church age to go into all the world. Doesn't mean we don't have laws. Doesn't mean we don't have boundaries. Doesn't mean that we don't feel a sense of justice when laws are upheld. Fine. But don't allow that to corrode your compassion, where you become angry and bitter and lose your example. Trump is back in office, and he is moving extremely, extremely quickly. And we just saw Trump versus the president of Colombia. You might have heard this story. Apparently, Trump was out golfing, and there were some flights of Colombian criminals who were in the United States illegally, and they were sending them back to Colombia. And the Colombian president said, you are not cleared to land. We are not taking them back. We don't feel like they're being, taken care of in the right way. And so Trump, as he does, he responded through a social media post. He said, I was just informed the 2 repatriation flights from the United States with a large number of illegal criminals were not allowed to land in Colombia. The order was given by Colombia's socialist president, Gustavo Petro, who's already very unpopular among his people. Petro's denial of these flights has jeopardized the national security and public safety of the United States. So I've directed my administration to do the following. Emergency 25% tariffs on all goods. After 1 week, it goes up to 50%. A travel ban and immediate visa revocations on the Colombian government officials, allies, and supporters. Visa sanctions on all party members, family members, and supporters of the Colombian government. Enhanced customs and border protection inspection at Colombian nationals and cargo on national security grounds. The IEEPA Treasury, banking, and financial sanctions to be fully imposed. These measures are just the beginning. We will not allow the Colombian government to violate its legal obligation with regards to the acceptance and return of the criminals they forced into the United States. Now, in our last segment, we talked all about how we should feel about deportations as Jesus followers, the balance of compassion and of boundaries. So I'm going to set that conversation aside, because we already did an entire segment on that. What I want to focus on here is the response of the president of the United States to the Colombian government. And I want to look at this somewhat agnostic of your political bent. And so if you're on the left, you probably think all the deportations are terrible. And the fact that we are sending planes there is terrible. And the fact that there were Colombians on board is terrible. And that Trump is terrible. And his hair is terrible. And JD Vance is terrible. And everything's terrible right now, right?
Wow.
Fine. What I want to talk about is the power of clarity. We have lived in a season, and I'm going back even in some regards to Trump 1, but certainly under Joe Biden, who I think it's obvious personally didn't quite have the mental faculty to just stand 10 toes down on almost any issue. And Scripture says, where vision lacks, the people perish. Where there is no clarity, the people perish. And sometimes this gets quite literal. And so when we look at the major conflicts that were happening over the last 4 years, you can point to, an unlimited number of issues when it comes to Ukraine and Russia, when it comes to Israel and Hamas, when it comes to the issues at the American southern border. Just such multi-variable issues. But at the top, at the leadership, and leadership matters. Your leadership of your life, your leadership in your family, your leadership at work, your leadership in your friend group, leadership matters. And if you're going to be a leader, you have to be clear. You have to bring clarity. You have to over-communicate clarity, and then you have to reinforce that clarity. And when you begin to do that, it is almost magic. If everyone's just on the same page, it's hard to overestimate the power of people being able to anticipate what's coming. And so you may hate every single position that Trump has, but the reason that we're seeing progress on some of these issues is because he is clear. Clarity matters. And so when the Colombian president says you can't come in, there isn't like a 6-month investigation. There aren't 17 committee meetings. There isn't kind of like, well, we don't really like that he did that, but we respect his ability to do it. And we kind of see his point, but we also kind of see our point. And, if you really think about it, and then 1,000 think pieces and 1,000 articles and a bunch of confusing press conferences, it's just clear. These are your citizens. They're illegally in our country. They've broken laws in our country. We are going to send them back. And if you say no, we're going to put the clamps on you. It's just clear. Now, if you were paying attention to this story, even CNN, who has historically not really been an ally of President Trump, to put that lightly, even they have to admit Colombia has walked back from the brink of a damaging trade war with the United States, reaching an agreement on accepting deported migrants being returned on military planes after a flurry of threats from Donald Trump that included steep tariffs. Colombia said Sunday evening it had agreed to all of President Trump's terms, including the unrestricted acceptance of immigrants who entered the U.S. illegally after 2 U.S. military planes carrying deportees were blocked from entering the country. The president said, we'll continue to receive Colombians and Colombian women who return as deportees, guaranteeing them decent conditions as citizens subject to rights. That's actually the foreign minister, Luis Gilberto Murillo, said in a televised statement. He added the U.S. deportation flights had resumed and the Colombian presidential plane was being prepared to assist in repatriating citizens. Clarity. The day before Donald Trump is inaugurated, there's a ceasefire in Gaza and hostages begin to be released. Now, I like most people, don't think we're going to make it to step 2 of this ceasefire agreement. I'm not sure how Hamas and Israel peacefully coexist next to each other. I think either Israel will go in and make sure Hamas is off the chessboard, or they will sit by and eventually Hamas will regroup and they will attack again. I just think this is an ancient problem that's not going anywhere anytime soon. But there is movement. There are hostages being returned. There is a ceasefire. There is not death every day in Gaza right now. The problem with Biden is there was no clarity. Outwardly, often he spoke like Israel's our number one ally, and we always support Israel. We've always got Israel's back. But then in the same breath, he would say, yeah, we're considering withholding some weapons that Israel might need. And I'm not really comfortable with how Israel's doing this, that, and the other. And I'm really not happy about this. And he was caught in between different factions of the Democrat Party. And so there wasn't clarity. And where you lack clarity, the people perish. And sometimes that means that they just aren't doing well emotionally or relationally or financially. And sometimes it means people actually die. And so it's like, even the Ukraine war, which is probably where the Biden administration was the most clear of like, we've got Ukraine 100%. We're all team Ukraine. We wear our yellow and blue pins. But then they just slow walked everything to them, where it meant they couldn't really push into Russia, like make a real shot, like winning the war. but they could kind of stay in the fight. And so it just ends up like this stalemate where lots of people are dying on both sides. Trump kind of is standing in the middle of both sides, which would seem almost the opposite of what I'm saying, but he is clear. And what he has been clear about throughout his entire campaign and seems to remain clear is the war has to stop. There has to be an off-ramp. And he doesn't really talk about Ukrainians dying or Russians dying. He just says there's too much death, too many people dying in an unnecessary war. So let's end it and we'll see what happens. It sounds like he is going to try to force people to the table. There is power in clarity, and we are called to be clear. And I think as followers of Jesus, sometimes we live in a world that, increasingly is moving in directions that are not just like tangential to Christianity, but are in direct diametric opposition to it. A culture who has accepted as truth many things that are called untrue in Scripture, that it has accepted as good many things that are called sin in Scripture. And there's been this idea that we will win the culture by kind of obfuscating what Scripture actually says about these things and kind of standing in the middle and sitting on the fence. And I don't believe that is going to work. I think that people can see through that. I think people already know what we think and largely what Christians have believed, like Orthodox Christians have believed. I think it is time to bring clarity. At Metachurch, where I'm the pastor, I think it'd be kind of obvious to people that a lot of what we do is in the seeker-sensitive model. And so what I've said for years is, well, we are seeker-sensitive in everything but the sermon. Because like when we get to the sermon, the word just says what it says. And so we're just going to preach what the word says. And we're going to talk about sin because sin matters and it separates us from God. And we need to understand our sin so that we can understand the sacrifice of Jesus on our behalf. And I think even in Christianity, as people are beginning to compromise and try to shift and try to change and try to disregard or reinterpret the clear passages of Scripture, all we're doing is lacking in clarity. And where clarity lacks, the people always perish. We're going to get to our last section, and you're just going to have to go with me on this one. You just have to go with me on this for just a second. Is Ryan Reynolds the male Taylor Swift?
Wow.
Is Ryan Reynolds the male actor version of what Taylor Swift is as the female pop star version? I don't know how I am so deep in this drama. I've tried chronologically to go like back in the timeline. This is the kind of news that typically I hear someone talking about and I'm so lost. I don't really know who we're talking about. I don't know what's going on. I'm not a tabloid guy. I listen to podcasts about interpreting Scripture and apologetics and some politics sometimes. I'm not in I don't watch e-news, so how did I get in this? Well, one of the reasons is it's so pervasive. Like everyone everywhere is talking about this right now. There is drama between Ryan Reynolds, his wife, Blake Lively, that's one team, and actor, producer, Justin Baldoni, that's the other team. And what seems to be happening is a movie came out and Blake Lively was the love interest of Justin Baldoni, and things got really weird in the lead up to the premiere of this movie. And there were all kinds of rumors, and Blake Lively was kind of being a terrible human being in a lot of her interviews. And Justin Baldoni wouldn't even do press, even though he was like the guy who owned the rights to the movie and was the lead actor in it. And the red carpet was super odd. Eventually, Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds, they sued Justin and I think the New York Times, something like that, for defaming her character. And I think at that point they thought it would kind of be over, but it wasn't. Because what ended up happening is Justin Baldoni, who happens to have a friend who's a billionaire, decided they were not just going to take this lying down. And basically countersued. So it's all out in the open. We have so many of the text messages and the background details. And at first, everyone thought Blake was the bad guy. And then they thought, oh, no, Justin's the bad guy. And then they thought, oh, no, I think Blake's the bad guy. And it turns out that likely Ryan Reynolds is the bad guy.
Wow.
And so all of this is very interesting. There are people who know so much more about this, and they have done really comprehensive breakdowns on this. And so you can go to a million channels. You can Google this, look it up on YouTube, and find out all the juicy details. And a lot of it is conjecture. The point I want to make is that Ryan Reynolds, who's Deadpool, right? He's worth $200 or $300 million. He owns overseas football clubs, like he owns Mint Mobile, right? He's an A-lister. He's like one of the most popular, wealthiest people on earth. He obviously has a problem with Justin Baldoni. And the reason that I say Ryan Reynolds might be the male Taylor Swift, and it's not a compliment.
Wow.
Is because everyone in the world went and watched Deadpool and Wolverine. It was over $1 billion at the box office. It's one of the highest grossing R-rated movies of all time. And nobody saw it on first watch. But there was a character inserted into Deadpool. And allegedly, all the scenes of this new character were shot way late in the movie after all of this drama with Blake and Justin Baldoni had surfaced. And now that you know what's going on in this weird little triangle of Justin and Blake and Ryan Reynolds, it becomes unmistakably obvious that this entire character is there to mock and belittle Justin Baldoni based on the issues that were happening between Justin and Blake Lively, who again is Ryan Reynolds' wife. And so we're going to look at some of these scenes that everyone missed. Nobody really saw it, but Ryan is passive aggressively using his art to be subversive and passive aggressive towards someone that he has a problem with. Does that sound like anyone that you might know? That's what Taylor Swift does. Taylor Swift puts out an album and you listen to the whole album. I mean, you listen to it. I don't listen to it. I'm not a Swiftie. I'm sorry, Swifties. Come at me. I don't listen to it. Not that I don't know her songs. They're everywhere. I'm not a Swiftie, but you are, maybe. And you listen to the song and you go, oh my gosh, that was, a mediocre song. And then you listen to it again and it's like, oh my gosh, that whole song's about John Mayer.
Wow.
Oh my gosh, that whole song is about one of the Jonas Brothers.
Wow.
Oh my goodness, that whole song is about that one guy.
Wow.
She uses her art subversively to be passive aggressive towards people that she has issues with in real life. Let's look at these clips from Deadpool.
Oh my goodness, wait till you see Lady Pool. She is gorgeous. She just had a baby too and can't even tell.
So that is Nice Pool. He has the exact hair as Justin Baldoni. The exact hair. Not now, but I guess before he started shooting this movie. This is almost word for word in the text messages, the accusations that Blake Lively was making against Justin Baldoni, that her baby weight was a problem and all of this.
I don't think you're supposed to say that. That's okay. I identify as a feminist. You let this little...
Okay, so Justin Baldoni, huge feminist. It's like his entire brand is that he is like a true blue, real life male feminist. Now, he's going to talk about Dogpool, this ugly, disgusting dog that's in the movie. And people think that this is Ryan Reynolds subversively talking about his wife, who was in this romantic movie with Justin Baldoni.
Out
Nice
of your
Pool.
sight for 1 second and she starts shopping for a new papa. Where's your mask? Come on, guys. If you can't be a responsible pet owner, then maybe you don't deserve this little unicorn. Guilty on all charges, Your Honor. It shan't happen again.
You're gonna have to give me my dog back, though.
If something should happen to you, I'd love to be her papa. What would ever happen to me?
So the suggestion is all the conversations about the dog is kind of this subtext of these two men fighting over Blake Lively. Awkward.
Lots of stuff. It costs nothing to be kind.
Shutting the f up is also free.
You better hope that you don't run into the Deadpool core. If they could only process their childhood trauma, they'd go on one heck of a healing journey.
Okay, so some of this is definitely conjecture, and some of it is impossible to miss. So Justin Baldoni, again, guys, I don't know how I'm so deep in the freaking tea on this.
Wow.
I don't know how this happened. I started parting my hair in the middle, and all of a sudden I know things about Blake Lively, okay? So regardless, Justin Baldoni has talked widely and publicly about his process of healing from his childhood trauma so he could be a better and kinder person. This is obviously the subversive use of Ryan Reynolds' art to be passive aggressive towards someone he has a problem with. Now, at the very end of the movie, I'm not going to show it because it's super violent, but Lady Pool comes out. She's voiced by Blake Lively, and she shoots Nice Pool in the chest like 17,000 times, right? So not so subtle that there's a problem between Blake Lively and her husband and Justin Baldoni, and at the climax of the movie, she shoots the problem in the chest over and over and over again.
Wow.
So why are we talking about this? Might be the question. If you've spent any time watching this podcast, we typically aren't going through tabloid gossip. We're talking about this, number one, because Ryan and Blake and Taylor Swift are all really good friends. And it's just shocking to me that I never saw it until now. But Ryan Reynolds is the male Taylor Swift. That's the conclusion I came to. He uses his art subversively to be passive aggressive towards others. And I'll tell you what I hate about this, because all the gossip and the lawsuits and everything, they're going to play themselves out. I think Ryan Reynolds might be the bad guy, which is a bummer because he's really likable. I love Wrexham FC. Like, I love that show. Him and Rob McElhenney, they seem really cool on there, you know. He's a huge star of the MCU. I like the Marvel movies. I think he might be the bad guy. We'll see. That will all play itself out. It seems undeniable that these are digs at Justin Baldoni in his art that he can do nothing about. I've always felt this way about Taylor Swift. Like, who would date her? Because if it doesn't work out, and it won't, but if it doesn't work out, she's going to destroy you. There's going to be 40 million 12-year-old girls singing songs about how terrible of a person you are. I don't like passive aggression. And I don't think it's biblical. I don't think it's a wise way of living. I think, Jesus said one time, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Like, say what you need to say. And we live in a world where kind of our culture has been emasculated. And I'm going to tiptoe into traditional gender stereotypes here. So pray for me. Statistically, we can look at personality and temperament, and women typically, not always, but typically are more conflict averse. And typically, throughout human history, they have not been prone to outright aggression, and certainly not physical aggression. So instead, they are passively aggressive, and they use things like rumors and character assassination and subversion and passive aggression. And then men historically have been more prone to active aggression, and so engaging in direct conflict. Men obviously, typically, not always, but typically are more prone to physical aggression than women would be. But in the West, the whole culture has been so emasculated that everyone is just passive aggressive. It's like almost impossible to find someone who will engage in real conflict. And real conflict is a good thing, because even if it's not the healthiest, you can learn to be healthy in your conflict, and healthy conflict is how you grow. And it's always surprising when you take Americans overseas, outside of the West, where you see that men and women on average are just way more comfortable with conflict, and especially the men. There's not a lot of passive aggression. They will just say what they need to say to you to your face. And as Americans, we're like almost offended. It's like, hey, don't just tell me what you think about me. Be passive aggressive like everyone else, right? I hate passive aggression. Number one, I'm not wired to pick up on it very well. So like, if you have a problem with me and you think I'm going to understand it by you being passive aggressive, I'm not going to. I won't get it. I won't even know you're mad at me. So you just have to tell me, you know? And the The truth is everyone is worried about confrontation and everyone is worried about conflict. But if you just learn some like very basic skills on how to hold people accountable to their actions, your life will get infinitely more peaceful. You'll be more successful. You will grow and mature as a person. I hate that I saw these scenes and had no connection to them, like everyone, like listening to a Taylor Swift song and not realizing that it's about, the seventh boyfriend she had 5 years ago. And you're just like nodding along to it. And then it's like, oh, wow, you're trying to destroy someone's character, but you're not willing to be a man about it. You're not willing to be upfront about it. You're not willing to stand 10 toes down on it. If you really have a problem, bro, especially between someone and your wife, you got to go 10 toes down. You can't do all this back end manipulation, passive aggressive. That's a sign of weakness. That's a sign of an inability to process what you're going through. That's a sign that you're not ready to handle the responsibilities you have signed up for. And so as we watch this unfold, unfortunately, what happens, if you're not willing to do the conflict in a straightforward and upfront way, that conflict just goes underground. And as it's underground, it doesn't stay stagnant. It grows and grows and grows and grows. And so if you're married and you have a problem with your spouse and you're just passive aggressive about it, I guess I'll do this again. I guess I'll make the call. I always have to. If you're just passive aggressive about it, what you're doing is you're like slightly avoiding the conflict, but it's like planting a seed. That seed doesn't stay small. It grows and grows and grows. And eventually it breaks ground. And what happens in our relationships is we have all these reconcilable differences and we push them underground and they grow and they grow and they grow. And when they finally can't be contained, they erupt. And what could have been reconcilable differences through just having a little bit of conflict are now irreconcilable differences. There's a verse in James and it says that the way that sin happens is we're tempted by our desires and we don't do anything to stop them. We don't come into conflict with them. We don't speak truth to them. And our desires give birth to sin, right? So eventually it comes to the surface. And if we're not willing to deal with that and confront it and confront ourselves and do the work, then that eventually leads us to death. And unfortunately, I'm sure, here's my guess, I think Ryan Reynolds is going to be the bad guy in this. I'm sure when he cut in these scenes last second and he made Nice Pool and he was basically this guy that he hates because of whatever we'll find out between him and Blake. And I'm sure he felt so clever. I'm sure he laughed so hard. I'm sure he felt so satisfied knowing that Justin Baldoni would see this and know that it's him and watch Blake Lively shoot him in the chest a bunch of times. But when you don't deal with it and it goes underground, temptation creates sin and sin creates death. It comes back to haunt you when you don't engage in real conflict with the things that are going on in your life. When you try to hide from them through passive aggression, they will come back. They'll come back in force, and it will be infinitely worse than if you would have just dealt with it in the proper way, in the proper time. Well, this has been episode 73 of the Clayton Tyner podcast. I hope you will subscribe to my YouTube channel. Also that you'll check out patreon.com/Clayton Tyner. Man, get on there. We do live Q&As every month. It's so much fun. Some exclusive content on there. You can also check out metachurch.tv to see what we're up to there. I love you guys. I'll see you on episode 74.